Hello again, Chris Lee here, joined by my friends Graham Doty and Alfred Ezman for week's edition of SEC Baseball Weekly, in which we'll hit a few topics. We will hit the final read on the draft. You had a few guys who didn't sign. I think we've covered the draft in a few episodes, but we'll wrap up any loose ends and maybe go over a couple another time or two. We will talk about 2025 draft rankings. A lot of SEC guys, commits, players already appearing in rankings for next year. Finally, we'll hit on some transfer portal updates. And in future shows, we're going to hit on some of the rules changes with the scholarships and those things, but we're not going to do that today. We'll mostly stick to on-field news because we got plenty of shows to come this fall. Anyway, before we get into it, a reminder, we are brought to you by Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can get a free 50% bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, every live odds and spreads with all the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, the game starts here. Well, where we start today is the draft. And we've gone over a lot of these. I'm just going to give you a few things. I think we talked about Ryan Prager from Texas A&M, the highest drafted player not to go to college among anybody. Tyler Bell, the Kentucky commitment. We went over that last episode. The highest rated, I think, commitment not to sign. But a few things since then. Some loose ends I want to get to. A couple of signees. We've got Erik Parker, 15-round selection of the Dodgers. He's going to go to Georgia. Shortstop. We've got Ole Miss getting a couple of pitchers. I think we've covered these before. Graham, Connor Spencer, and Hunter Elliott both going to Ole Miss rather than going pro. Florida, the beneficiary of Brendan Lawson, the number 156 prospect, who was picked 19th round to the Cardinals. He is going to Gainesville instead. Auburn really racked up. Connor Gatwood, pitcher, number 103 on MLB Pipeline, 19th round pick of the Angels. He's going to Auburn, as is Demarion Terrell, a 19th round pick of the Blue Jays, and Chase Fralick, 19th round selection to Auburn, to the Padres going to Auburn. So Auburn gets 3 drafted prospects through. Finally, we talked about this before, but Colby Shelton going back to Florida, and then Mac Rose, Mr. Irrelevant, JUCO commit, made it official. He's going to Vandy. I don't know how much we've got to cover on these loose ends, but I'll start with you, Alfred. Anything that stands out here we haven't talked about a whole lot?
Yeah, I'll connect it to the ones I haven't spoke on. I'll connect it to portal moves we'll get into later in the show. Erik Parker stands out just because Georgia has been making waves, massive tidal waves in the portal. So that's just another guy that gets to come back in there, and there'll be good baseball in Athens. And then similar stuff with Auburn. I'll get way more into detail about them later in the show. But Auburn getting their guys back from the draft, coming to Auburn to play for them this upcoming spring is huge. That their portal class has really jumped the gun on ranking wise, according to 64 Analytics, with where they're at. And that's the biggest standout to me. I mean, we've talked about, we did Mac Rose from Vandy, Shelton from Florida, Prager, we talked about last week coming back. The top guys are there, but it's those two schools, Georgia and Auburn, who are bringing guys back in while getting guys in from the portal. And their teams are collectively looking really talented heading into 2025.
Graham, any loose ends to type here on your end? I know the 2 Ole Miss pitchers are big gets for Mike Bianco. Anything else? I mean, Auburn getting 3 guys to the draft is pretty big, in addition to the big transfer they got late from Florida.
Yeah, Auburn, to me, stands out big time, and that's because, look, everybody knows how good the SEC is, but somebody has to lose these games. And this past season, it was kind of Auburn and Missouri were in that boat, and just kind of a nightmare of a season for Auburn, bit by the injury bug, heavily, and they could just never really get healthy and get over that hump. Butch Thompson is a phenomenal coach. He's been to Omaha on multiple occasions. Last year just had to be very frustrating for him and his staff. They are renovating the stadium. I would just expect this upcoming season a huge bounce back year for the Auburn Tigers. I mean, Butch and his staff, they're just too good of a coaching staff. They're too talented. I expect them to bounce back in a big way. And as far as Ole Miss goes, the two pitchers, yeah, Connor Spencer last year was his first year at Ole Miss. He's from Mississippi, but he started his career in southeastern Louisiana. His stuff is electric. He's battled health issues throughout the course of his career. And the thing for him, just got to be consistent. He's got to be healthy. He's a bullpen arm. He's not really going to be a starter. And then Hunter Elliott touched on him a lot over the past few weeks. Hasn't pitched in 2 years. And if he's remotely to what he was as a true freshman 2 years ago, I mean, he will be a weekend starter without a doubt for Ole Miss this upcoming season.
Yeah, hoping he gets healthy. Just had so much promise as a freshman, and since then it's just been a lost career. But here's hoping for the better for him. Alfred, you said you were going to connect this to the portal. I know you had a couple of notes, so I'll let you go on that for a bit.
Yeah, so we were talking about Auburn and moves they made. Auburn's oh, I'm sorry, I just had a brain fart. Auburn's transfer portal class just jumped all the way up into the top 5, according to 64 Analytics. They're right behind Wake Forest, who sits at 4 right now. Somewhere probably a lot of people who follow college baseball did not expect Auburn to be based on how they played this year. And for Butch Thompson and his sake, getting a class like this in just bodes well for him heading into next year in a year where they need to bounce back. And it seems like they will. I mean, they bring in a ton of talent. Cade Fischer at one point it was like a few weeks into the portal. He became the #1 guy in the portal, and Auburn's able to get him. They're able to get Bristol Carter, a good hitter out of East Carolina, batted 300 plus this past season. Mason Koch was a guy we talked about way at the beginning of our offseason shows, a relief pitcher from Creighton. And then Jet Johnston, who really has not gotten the light of day so far at A&M, is transferring into there. And presumably, I would think he's a guy who is going to go out there onto the field and get tons of playing time. So Butch Thompson's doing a really good job with that squad and gathering more people looking for a bounce back year. In my opinion, Auburn is looking like a top half team in the SEC just based off of these moves they're making. Granted, we have to play baseball before we can officially say it. But compared to these other schools in the conference, they've clearly dominated and won the portal, with the exceptions of the top 2 being LSU and Arkansas, of course. And then looking ahead at some other schools, I want to highlight Jim Schlossnagle and the job he's doing at Texas. They're ranked 6th right now on 64 Analytics. Some big guys they got there. Aiden Moffitt coming in from LSU. LSU's pitching staff was just kind of ran through this offseason via the draft or the portal because of a lot of guys transferring out of there. It's going to be a new look in Baton Rouge, and Aiden Moffitt's heading over to Austin to play for the Longhorns. He should be a high usage reliever for them, I would think, depending on what their pitching situation is. And then they also land Connor McCreary from South Carolina. He's a guy who played a little bit for them, but has a lot of upside. Obviously, he was looking to get out and play more elsewhere. And I mean, Austin, Texas is a wonderful place to do that if he can get out there and get playing time as well. So those are the 2 big names, at least from the SEC, that Texas got. Obviously, they went out and got a lot more. They're the 6th ranked portal class right now. So Schlossnagle immediately making an impact in Austin heading into next season. And then finally, LSU, speaking of them, we talked about them with Moffitt, but they made a big move just recently with Luis Hernandez out of Indiana State. Indiana State was a big upset team heading into the tournament last year, although Kentucky silenced that with their regional, but they were a team that everyone had their eye on heading into this year's tournament, and Hernandez was a big reason for that. 359 average, 23 home runs, and an OPS of 1.1 plus. So he is a really big bat for the Tigers. And he's a guy, based on how they do in fall scrimmages in this offseason, who really can be implemented into that lineup with other people returning like Jared Jones and whatnot. And the Tigers will look to remain strong as well. So those are the main transfer portal little updates I had. Obviously, I think it's kind of died off just a little bit, but who knows? We could see some more moves leading up into the fall as well.
Yeah, he and Jared Jones will be 2 big bats in the middle of that order. LSU, like you said, the pitching got hit hard in the draft, but they do bring several. They had a couple of draft eligible sophomores that they got through. Jones being one of them who had a big. In fact, I thought Jones was their best hitter most of the year until Tommy White caught late. So, yeah, I guess we're kind of at the end of things with the portal, and at this point, again, it's the point in the offseason where not to like is going on, but we are starting to see some 2025 draft forecasts. Alfred, I know you put this list together. We got a bunch of SEC players on here. We'll talk about. We got some commits from a few teams. What is standing out to you when you start to see draft rankings come up for 2025?
Yeah, before we dive into them, this by no means the guys we're about to name and we have listed is all of them. I mean, this is going to shift so much up until next summer when the 2025 draft is. But these are guys who are obviously going to headline and make some noise. Jace Laviolette, I think, is the king of this list, obviously, and probably the king of college baseball. He's a guy who can end up being the #1 pick. I know Jackson Holliday's brother is up there as well as one. He's going to Oklahoma State as of right now. Ethan Holiday, I couldn't think of it now; it just popped into my head. But he's a guy, who's listed a lot by at the #1 pick, and MLB Pipeline has him there. Laviolette's hot on his tail, so that's the main name. A lot of these guys are recruits too in high school, committed to some SEC schools. A few to name: Brady Neal going to LSU, Quentin Young going to LSU. There's a few Vandy guys too, Chris. Seth Hernandez and who's this other one? Sean Gamble, 2 Vandy recruits as well, listed pretty highly in some of these drafts. Coy James is an Ole Miss guy. Aloy out of Arkansas is high up there. Aloy, I believe, is in some top 10s as of this early. So I expect him to have a big year as well in Fayetteville. So it's a lot of high-end guys as well. There's a few Florida Gators. I tend to talk about them a lot, but they're sneaking into the bottom of first-round action. That's Brody Donay. I think Donay has a lot of power in that bat from what I saw this season. I don't think it ever came, truthfully into the fold, but this year is a chance for him to do that because he's going to be a big leader on that team with Caglione missing and whatnot. Their transfer out of Miami, Blake Sear, he's up there as well in some drafts too. And then there's other guys. I mean, obviously I skipped right past him. Colby Shelton is going to be high up in draft boards too. So there's a lot of Florida Gators up there. I'm interested. I didn't see any pitchers listed. I would have to think that there's some out there. I think Clemente is getting some draft buzz a little, but there's going to be more pitchers Florida has that I think work their way onto there just because last year we saw they were so young and they really didn't catch fire until the tournament came around. So that's just a few things that I noticed listing these guys off. And obviously with the high school guys, we don't have, there's way more out there than what we have listed. There's obviously going to be those 2 that come into the picture as far as whether or not they're going to get taken there in the draft next year.
Yeah, Laviolette at 1, Graham, will be interesting. I think he was the prohibitive favorite a few weeks ago. Now it's he or Holiday, which would be interesting to see 2 Holidays go #1 within the span of 3 years, 4 years, whatever it's been. I guess 4 by that point. But Laviolette to me is a kid who's got everything you need.
Yeah, he really is, and you can see why Coach Early made him a focal point at Texas A&M. Gets the job, and I mean, probably a big reason why he got the job, just his relationship, not only with Laviolette, but everybody at Texas A&M. So bright future for him. Again, short term, Texas A&M, I mean, expect them to be top 3, top 5 this upcoming season. And then you're looking at a team that has so much talent, and he's right at the top of it. So I expect a huge season for him this upcoming year.
Probably the next guy to talk about is Ike Irish, Auburn's catcher, who, Alfred, I'm seeing him top 10, a lot of projections. Is that what you're seeing too? He's a big-time bat. Yeah, and has been for 2 years. I think the catching, Graham, is the part that I'm not as sure about. Although if you can hit these days with the DH, you can play.
Right. Yeah, I had Auburn Kentucky series, and he was banged up. Like, he didn't play one game, and then the other game he was the DH. He did not catch just because he was banged up at that point of the season. And just conversations you have with people around the SEC and in the game of baseball, he can hit, so he's going to be on everybody's radar. It's just what position will he be, especially at the next level. It kind of feels like, unless he turns things around defensively drastically, like he might be an outfielder or maybe a first baseman. But he's going to be fine because he can hit. And if he's healthy, look out. Another big reason why I think Auburn will have a bounce back year.
Alfred, Wehiwa Aloy at I don't know. I'm sorry if you had anything to say on Irish, but I was going to go to Aloy because he's kind of the next guy out there, the shortstop at Arkansas, who was pretty good with the glove, okay with the bat, not great, showed double-digit home run pop. Be interesting. I think the bat will have to probably come on a little bit more, but he was the next guy I was going to talk about, but you may have some thoughts on Irish too.
Yeah, just quickly on Irish. I mean, I think if you're batting 300 plus and getting on base 400 plus in back-to-back seasons, you're steady enough to where, one, you're going to do it again this year, and I think he will. And then on top of that, I think MLB teams just like that. You're that steady and consistent at those rates in college. So I think Irish will end up in the first round. But I'll talk about Aloy. I mean, Aloy's a guy who got a lot of buzz this past year as a transfer from Sacramento State. I think, Chris, I think you're right. He did hit like a little bit of a, oh, welcome to the SEC kind of stride, if you will. It wasn't anything bad. I mean, I'll take, you know, this year at Arkansas, it's a 270 average. The on base was a little bit down at 355. But I mean, I think, you know, obviously he got that year in of, you know, what SEC ball is about at Sacramento State. He was unbelievable as a mid-major player. And this year, I think he's going to be at least, you know, he's going to show his face into first-team SEC conversations at the very least. And I think, if anything, he's going to be one of, if not Arkansas's main bat, which already gets you looked at a lot among MLB scouts and stuff. And I think that average can hop above 300 in year two playing SEC ball. And he's definitely, I've seen him listed first round pretty much across the board. So it's a guy who I expect to be one of the top players in the league, at least one of the top bats in the league, just based on, you know, he had that buffer year of getting used to SEC play. I'm very excited for him. And if you're an Arkansas fan, because I know we get a lot of Arkansas people watching our baseball stuff, you're pretty pumped for Aloy's second year in Fayetteville, because I think it'll be something special.
One of the next guys on the list, I'm seeing this guy getting first round mention, and boy, did A&M miss him in the finale. That's Shane Sdao, who's getting some first round love. I think I said this at the time. I thought that they might have missed him more than Braden Montgomery in Omaha, Graham.
You think so?
Well, I mean, you gotta, that's a tough call. I mean, you know, you can add a run or subtract some runs. I mean, they're pitching, how do you say it? They had a lot of guys, but I mean, that was one more that, like, you got him in there. You got a lot of cards you can play in that game 2 situation that maybe they didn't play, or even in game 3. But either way, he's getting talked about as a first rounder for next year now.
Yeah, you got to think if he just stays healthy, stays on track, continues to progress, you know, he's going to be in great shape by the time the draft rolls around next year, for sure.
Next guy I'm seeing, RJ Austin at Vanderbilt, potential first rounder. Is an interesting guy, kind of a throwback player. I think he stole over 30 bases last year. If not, he was close, which had to be among the leaders in the league. He's just played all over the diamond. We've seen him some at second. We've seen him some at center. He could play short. I don't know where they put him, but Alfred, that guy, you've seen him in person a little bit too. That guy's a real throwback player. He's a dynamo. He's energetic. He will sometimes take some chances. Sometimes that doesn't always go his way, trying to take an extra base or swipe a base. But if you just like a big ball of energy at the top of your lineup, you could do a whole lot worse than RJ Austin.
Yeah, I did see him in person. And in fact, it was the game they lost, but he went 5 for 5 that game. He was unbelievable. And, you know, I asked Tim Corbin about him, and Chris, he described him the same way you did. Throwback player. And I'm looking at the stolen bases are off the charts, 28 this season. The batting numbers are, you know, are down at 335, but he gets on base, or he got on base way more this year than the year before at a 400 rate. So he's doing that. And then whenever he gets on base, he's a weapon. And I think that's something that MLB teams, at least teams in the MLB that play small ball, value a ton. You know what I mean? Just to get into your farm system and stuff. There's certain teams that target that just because, you know, you don't have as much power in your lineup. So when you do that and you can steal bases, you immediately get in the scoring position. And RJ Austin's the epitome of that. It's a guy, I mean, he's going to be, I would say, you would know better, Chris, but he would be the leader of this Vanderbilt team. I mean, one of them heading into next year, just because of the experience he has and the way they're looking to bounce back and make it out of a regional. But draft wise, if you're a GM or a scout or whatever, and you're looking for a guy who loves to play small ball, he ought to be high up there. And I think if there's a team in the first round that's willing to do that, and just because, you know, you can't move around in the draft in the MLB, I think there's a chance that he could go in the first round strictly because of that. Obviously, we'll have to wait way later on. We're a little under a year away from next year's draft, but I think it's a guy who, out of all the stolen base people in next year's draft, depending on whatever high school players we can get to look at, he's one of the top, if not the top guy for it.
Yeah, I think so too.
How much does he remind you of Tony Kemp?
Well, he's about a half a foot taller, but no, very, very similar players. Kemp was a little more patient at the plate. Tony Kemp, by the way, lived in my neighborhood, so I know him a little bit. That one hits close to home. But yeah, I mean, very, very similar guy. Gets on. He probably the difference is he doesn't get on base as much. Definitely got a little more pop in his bat. I think that'll be the dimension. Like if he gets from I don't remember how many home runs he hit, maybe a half dozen last year. If he can double that, I think he had a good summer. He'll be interesting to watch. But Alfred, going to throw this one back to you. Basically the Tennessee infield minus whoever plays first base. Andrew Fischer, Gavin Kilen, and Dean Curley, who is, I guess, a draft-eligible sophomore, all guys that are getting run is potential probably top 100 picks next year.
Yeah, I'll start with Curley just because I think he's the one who he was very impressive this year, obviously, on that national championship team. And heading into next year, he's going to be the guy in the infield just because they lost, obviously, Burke, Amick, and Moore to the draft. And I think out of anyone, Dean Curley is going to be the one who comes in there and really just pops off. The tricky part Tennessee had heading into last year was the whole Zane Denton thing was, you know, who's going to really play short? It was kind of like a mystery almost. And Curley came in and I think was pretty sound for the most part. And if anything, I think the defense will get better. I think that's his key heading into this year draft wise is how good is the defense at short's going to be. I honestly think he's going to step up with his bat, much like, you know, Burke and Moore did. Not saying he'll put up those numbers, but he'll be one of the top bats Tennessee has next year. And he'll, you know, I think the question for him is just going to be defensively, what is he able to do at short? Because that's obvious. That's a pretty big deal when you're looking at a shortstop you want to draft. Then as far as Fischer goes, one of the big name transfers coming in, and I think if the pop and the bat stays there, you know, Tennessee will once again have just, you know, another crop of power hitters to work with. And I think MLB scouts are catching on that Knoxville is coming a little bit of an MLB factory in that case for getting guys with power like that. Maybe it has to do with the ballpark a little, but at the same time, they're doing it. You saw it last year. I mean, they did it everywhere. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing. I think those two, Fischer and Curley, the batting is great, but with Curley in particular, it's defensively. If he can stay stout and sound like he did last year and even get a little better, he really can shoot up draft boards pretty quick.
Yeah, I think Josh Elander may be a guy that starts to get some sniffs from MLB at some point, the way he's coached hitting up. Next group of guys, two guys from Georgia. And I'm looking at Prospects Live. I'll look at Baseball America too because I got a sub over there. I'm just kind of pulling these as they come. But and by the way, another guy for Tennessee in this range too, and another guy from Vandy, A.J. Russell and J.D. Thompson. We'll get those guys in a minute. But Tre Phelps, draft-eligible sophomore, had a really fantastic freshman year for Georgia. Numbers could have been really big. Could he have stayed healthy? And here's one that's a surprise. Colton Smith, big right-hander for Georgia, who, you know, was dominant with the fastball, I think, when he was in there. The pitching numbers weren't great, which Foley Field, not an easy park to pitch in, but it feels like Georgia's really starting to up its game in terms of producing draft prospects after, of course, Charlie Condon going third to the Rockies.
I totally agree.
Right.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Alfred, but
no, you're.
I mean, you look at first-year head coach, first time ever being a head coach at any level. And just what a season they had. Super regional year one, gets the contract extension. And you just kind of get the sense, especially with the new ballpark being built or the renovations being built to Foley Field, he's got a chance to be there for a long time. One thing about Georgia, you never have to worry about that state producing baseball talent. It seems like they always have talent no matter what. The issues have just been building a consistent baseball program, and it certainly feels like they're on the right track to do that.
Couple of pitchers here. I'll take one, Alfred. I'll give you A.J. Russell, but I'll start with J.D. Thompson at Vandy. Lefty, really saw the fastball jump a little bit this year. Probably more pitchability than blow you away. That one will be interesting. I think he'll slide into the Vanderbilt rotation this year. And then A.J. Russell, man, you talk about regrets we had in college baseball last year. A.J. Russell started out like a house on fire in Tennessee's opening game. I think he struck out 10 guys in the blink of an eye, and it just was never really healthy again. They tried to roll him out in the SEC tournament, but a healthy A.J. Russell could be the pitcher of the year. I mean, Ryan Prager probably going to be your favorite going into next year, and a few other guys, but I think a healthy A.J. Russell would be high up in that discussion.
He's certainly towards the top. I mean, I think it was kind of crazy how we were watching what Tennessee was doing and how good the pitching was out, and they never had to break out of their rotation at all during the tournament. And we're sitting here the whole time going, A.J. Russell has a sling on in the dugout, and it's just watching from afar them do this. It's crazy that they never had him even with all the success that they were having. And you said it. It was the one of those college classics in Texas. I believe it was at Globe Life Field. Was the 10 strikeout game against Texas Tech. Anytime you could do that and go four and a third, giving up just 2 earned runs, and he only walked 1 guy over that stretch too. So he made the Red Raiders earn it with their bats, and they really just couldn't for what it's worth. And then moving on down the list, I mean, he never really went far into games. I mean, Albany 3 innings, Alabama 2 innings, Ole Miss 3 innings. And then obviously they rolled him out in the tournament against Vandy and LSU, and it just was like, yeah, it just didn't kind of work out. But the strikeouts are there. He at least records a strikeout an inning, and I mean, way more than that most of the time. The Albany game stands out. I know it's a midweek opponent, but 4 strikeouts and 3 innings of work, and only walking 1 is just great stuff from him. The one bad walk game he had was against Ole Miss. He walked 6 guys in 3 innings in that matchup. But besides that, the walk numbers are down. And there's a lot of guys in Major League Baseball who pitch like that. Zach Eflin is a guy who comes to mind who just does not walk a lot of guys. And there's a lot of others. And that's something MLB teams value. And as far as SEC accolades and awards go, I think if he stays healthy, it might be him and Prager just going back and forth for the league's best pitcher. Albeit someone might step up in their place. But as of right now, off the top of our heads, that's who I can think of. So he's definitely a guy for, as far as draft stock goes, that's going to shoot up. And just because he was hurt last year is the reason we're not hearing his name as much as you normally would.
Graham's seen another Tennessee pitcher in there. This one, a Coastal Carolina transfer, Ole Miss in between. Tennessee will be his 3rd school in 3 years. You know how I'm talking about. Liam Doyle. We didn't see a lot of him, but when we did see him, he was Ole Miss's best arm a year ago.
Yeah, he really was. And that was not the case to start the season. I don't know what the Ole Miss coaching staff or Ole Miss fans really knew what to expect. And he kind of was thrown into the fire pretty early. Okay, this is going to be the Friday night guy or Saturday night guy this season. And you look at his numbers, his ERA was around 5. It's a little bit misleading. He, against the best competition in the league, he really was good. He quality starts against Texas A&M. I mean, you name it, and didn't really walk anybody in his quality starts and had a lot of strikeouts. He will be a weekend starter for Tennessee, and with their offense and what Tennessee has done historically under Tony Vitello, you got to think that's going to be a pitcher's best friend for Liam Doyle. He's a guy who just pitches with a lot of confidence. Tennessee fans are going to love him. Like, he's very emotional, fired up, kind of a wiry pitcher, and just Tennessee fans will absolutely love him when he's on the mound, and especially if he's feeling it with a lead, like, they're going to eat him up. So if he's healthy, expect big things for him this upcoming season with that offense behind him.
We're not done with Tennessee arms. I keep scrolling down and finding more. Nate Snead, a top 100 guy for the draft. And I think that one could rise, Alfred, because what was a fastball touching 101 last year? Felt like or close to it. The strikeout numbers, like occasionally you find a guy that throws hard that the strikeout numbers aren't quite what you'd think they would be. Like Ben Joyce was that guy when he was in Tennessee. I think he threw 105. You'd think he'd strike out, you know.
You didn't know where it was going to go?
Of hitters. Yeah, that might have been part of it. But Snead, the next guy, just was so impressed with how he was durable and could be used in a lot of situations. I think that's a guy that feels like a high floor pitcher for the draft because of all the stuff he can do.
Yeah, it'll be good to have too, because I mean, he kind of, if you didn't go Snead last year, you could have went Aaron Combs to close out a game. Combs obviously is in professional baseball now. So now really a lot of that's on Snead and seeing what he could do and stuff. But with Snead, it's interesting because it reminds you of Ben Joyce in that sense. By the way, shout out to him. He recorded his first save a few nights ago in Major League Baseball. So he's doing well and good for the Angels. But going back to Snead, I mean, the fastball power is really, really good. It's something scouts are going to love to see. And yeah, the strikeout numbers are weird. I'm looking at it, 75 innings in the third. He went 61 Ks. For a guy who can throw as fast as he can, that seems kind of odd. But at the same time, with a 3.11 ERA, he kept runs off the board. And sometimes that's all it takes, no matter what kind of pitch you throw. And I think Snead's going to be one of the biggest relievers this league has heading into next year. I mean, he'll probably be the biggest one Tennessee has, even though they got some transfers coming in, like Franklin from Kennesaw State, that can really pop off and show what they're made of. But Snead's a guy who can shoot up draft boards too. I don't know, Chris, where they have him. I assume it's a little later in the draft.
I think they got him in the 60s as a college prospect, which is probably round 3 or 4. But I mean, that could easily go to the first round. When you throw that hard and you've got that kind of frame, that's one I could see moving up between now and then.
Right. Yeah. And if he really hones it in and gets, more pinpoint with it, then it's watch out for the SEC and watch out come draft time, wherever he can end up. So that's a really big name to watch out for pitching wise for, really everyone around Major League Baseball and SEC fans.
All right, Alfred, I'm going to throw a couple more back at you because you are our accidental Florida correspondent this year. You kept making your way to see the Gators. It wasn't planned out. It just happened. But
no, I just can't help it.
You just can't help it.
Right.
Kade Klein is a guy that's listed as top 100. And another guy we talked about, Pierce Coppola, who threw maybe 10, 12 innings last year. We've talked about that one a lot. If the guy can stay healthy, there's a lot there, but that's always been the problem. But Kade Klein, guy, had a really good season. I mean, that Florida team, I think you're going to see preseason top 5. I think when D1 did its 8 for Omaha, I think maybe 9 of the 10 guys took Florida. I mean, you got him, you got Shelton, some of the pitching talent they'll have coming back, but Curlin will be an interesting bat for the Gators next year.
Yeah, the hitting was kind of weird with him compared to a year ago. I mean, you look at it, the average went down a little, on base went down a good bit, but the one thing that stayed there, and I think will help him with the draft, will be his power. I mean, his home runs barely dropped off, and he was still in double digits hitting home runs. That's a huge thing with him. I think technically, if the technical part of the hitting gets better, then Curlin's a guy who really, will turn heads as a hitting prospect. And again, the Gators, we mentioned it. I talked about Donay just to kind of kick off this little segment, but the power Florida has is really something. And I think if that hits early and they don't have to, sweat a ton like they did this past year going through the season, then it's really, I mean, they're going to sit in the top 5, I think, or at least top 10 for most of the season in baseball rankings, just because, I think you have the raw powers there. It's just technically, especially with Curlin, if he can get a little bit better with that. So that's the key with him. But then I want to talk about Coppola too. Coppola was pretty impressive in the NCAA tournament. He went a good bit of innings. I believe when he played Clemson, he went almost 4, almost or around or a little over 4 innings. So he was pretty good that year. He was one of those guys I was talking about with they're young, but they just need to, sit in Gainesville a little and kind of tune up. And Coppola is definitely one of them. I mean, the strikeouts are impressive. 35 strikeouts and 23 2/3. I think he gave up a lot of hits, which really hurt him in the end. I think when he wasn't striking out, He was giving up hits. The walk rate, I don't think was that bad either. I don't find 12 walks in 112 batters face that brutal. I just think the hit numbers kind of got to him a little bit. The opposing average was up at 290. But Coppola, I think, is going to be one of the biggest developers in Florida, and especially, I think, in that pitching staff as a whole. So two really interesting guys where if they fine-tune parts of their games that are more technical for Coppola, obviously just limiting hits as much as you would. Maybe the walk rate goes a little bit up, but if you trade that off for less hits, then that's something I think you can live with if you're Kevin O'Sullivan. And then with Curlin, I just think it's the fine-tune hitting, with the base hits and stuff, and not as much swinging and going for power that would help him a ton because his power's there. And I think scouts are going to realize his power's there. It's just about the getting on base, and really just staying within yourself when you're swinging. That will help him a lot.
Yeah, with Koppel, I felt like there was a little bit of Hagen Smith in there when it really flashed. And those were small bits, but somebody's going to like that and take a chance. Graham, I'm a little surprised this next guy's not higher. And I guess it's just kind of being a corner outfield guy. And there's a lot of guys that hit for power, but Ethan Petry, kind of in that second, third round fringe, it looks like probably more like second round. I think that's a guy, like if we're doing this time next year and Ethan Petry's been taken to the top 10, I could see that kid having that kind of season that would vault him up the board pretty quickly. And I know he's not known for the fielding, but we have seen him play third and we've seen him play first and even the outfield in bits and pieces.
Yeah, and if he continues to develop and progress defensively, like he's going to be fine. Especially if you're starting out where you're projected to go around the second round, life is good. So continue to play well in the summer league, fall ball, all of that. He's going to be in good shape for sure. And I mean, it doesn't matter what the sport is. There's going to be guys like him and then guys just totally off the radar that just come out of nowhere. I mean, who had Charlie Condon when he signed with Georgia? Who thought that he would go top 3? Or Paul Skeens when he was at Air Force? Who thought that he would be one of one and then make it to the big leagues in less than a year? So you just never know how this works. I mean, again, you can go on and on depending on, all the different sports. But again, I feel like I keep saying it, but again, it's just the truth. Not everybody, but so many prospects in the SEC, like the future is so bright. Just the amount of money invested in the game now in the SEC, it's just, you see it not only coaching staff, but support staff, facilities, nutrition, and it shows on the field.
All right, Graham, 3 guys that you've seen come through in the SEC West. Maybe more promise than production for all 3 of those guys. You get Brady Neal, the LSU catcher who's transferred to Alabama, big-time prospect out of high school 2 years ago. Bradley Loftin, same thing, didn't throw much last year, I think threw 8 innings for Mississippi State, big lefty. And then Alton Davis, who is now at Georgia, was a part-time closer, I think, at times for the Crimson Tide. Again, 3 guys with a lot of talent, even if the numbers haven't always translated to all SEC type production so far.
Yeah, and I would say somebody since Ole Miss wasn't very good this past season, I feel like not like if you weren't an Ole Miss fan, why would you watch Ole Miss play? So somebody like Andrew Fischer, when he's going to be at Tennessee this upcoming season, and there's just going to be more eyeballs as far as SEC baseball fans go, I think he's really going to, flash and pop to a lot of SEC fans and just college baseball fans around the country. He hit a tick under 300 this past season, 20 home runs. I mean, you just got to think, what will he be able to do in this Tennessee lineup with a lot of help around him as well? That's one I'm very curious to see what he does. Again, started his career at Duke, put up numbers at Duke. That's kind of one that I'm like highlight, circled, you name it. Fascinated to see what he looks like in a Tennessee uniform this upcoming season.
Couple of Vandy guys in Baseball America's Top 100. I didn't expect to see either of these guys there. Jayden Davis, their second baseman, who got hurt part of last year, was, I think, freshman of the year in the SoCon at Sanford 2 years ago. Levi Housman, who came to Vanderbilt out of Coastal Carolina. Did not pitch a lot for Vandy last year because the issues were the same ones he'd had at Coastal Carolina. That was not being able to throw strikes consistently, but he was I think he was a top 20 guy out by perfect game in his class 2 years ago out of high school. So you don't see guys like that often get to college. Those will be ones that, I mean, somebody will take a chance on Huseman just because of the stuff. Alfred, as we wrap it up, any other players from the SEC that are starting to get some love for next year's draft that we didn't get into before we talk about a couple of prospects?
Yeah, there's one from two of our newest teams I want to highlight. It's Easton Carmichael out of Oklahoma. He's listed as a catcher / outfielder. So whenever you have a utility like that, I think that lights up a green light for a lot of scouts because it's like, oh, well, this guy's already playing, two pretty much opposite kind of positions in the field. So we really can put him wherever we want him if we take a chance on him. And looking at his bat got better in 2024. I mean, 366 average, 406 on base. Slugging was over 500, stole a little bit with 12 stolen bases. The power could just take a little step up. He hit 7, but I mean, at the same time, he was hitting a well enough mark to, I think, put scouts on notice. So that's the other guy I would keep an eye on, Easton Carmichael out of Oklahoma.
Yeah, a couple other guys we didn't touch on. Blake Sear transferred to Florida from Miami. He's getting some top 100. And here's another Tennessee player, Cannon Peebles, who had transferred last year from North Carolina State, ended up kind of losing the catching job to Cal Stark. But he was a guy that I think hit double-digit bombs for NC State as a freshman and has got some good hitting tools. Just didn't work out for whatever reason last year.
Yeah, Peebles I think Peebles is going to have to take a huge step, to be quite honest. But that partially is because he just did not play in the field. But Tennessee was confident enough to slide him into DH when they needed him late in the postseason. So hopefully that steps up a little bit with his batting and stuff. I mean, a lot of things dropped off, but the at-bats dropped off too compared to NC State. So I think if he gets back to form like he did during his all-ACC freshman NC State season, then that stock will come back. And who knows, that very well could. But Peebles sneaking in later on the list, there's a lot that needs to happen for him. We'll see if that happens this year in Knoxville.
Graham, anybody on the list of returning players I missed or anybody worth talking about that we didn't get into enough there?
I think you did a really good job of going over everything. We kind of have an idea of what the rosters will look like. We might have a wrinkle here or there before first pitch. Still got a ways to go, obviously, before first pitch, but portal's closed, draft in the rearview mirror. So I kind of think, you kind of have a really good idea of what to expect lineup wise, 1 through 9 for everybody around the SEC, with Texas and Oklahoma about to join the party.
I mean, it's incredible how many names we just named. I'll say this. I don't think this class is as good as last year's at the SEC. And I'm not sure that there's a Condon or a Caglione or
That's
somebody
right,
of that stature. But I mean, that could change. I mean, these guys keep getting better. The sheer number of prospects amaze me. And I think what is really interesting is we went through a number of guys where like, well, they didn't really play much last year or didn't do much.
Yeah.
But the talent this league gets, there's just so much of it that you've got guys playing reserve roles in this league that are going to get a chance to show something and maybe make the bigs.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Cannon Peebles is an example of that. It's just a lot of, I think at least the guys I talked about, it's a lot of fine tuning stuff. And I mean, they have, August and then the fall when they start scrimmaging and really practicing with one another. And then this entire season to get to that point. There's a lot of shifting that will happen and stuff. And you said this too, Chris, the amount of high school prospects too they're through the roof. And I named a few guys committed to SEC schools. There's a ton more out there who we're going to see that I probably have no idea that exists and stuff. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously we're doing this 11 months ahead of schedule with the early 2025 class, but there's a lot that can shift and change, and we'll have to see. It'll make it very interesting. The class may not be as good, but I think it's as intriguing, at least in one aspect, as last year's class.
Alfred, we'll wrap it up with you. And we're not going to spend a lot of time here unless you got observations. And for just disclosure, I'm not going to sit and pretend I know a lot about these guys because I don't. But there's a lot of high school kids that are committed to SEC schools that you're seeing pop up in drafts. Tell me what you're seeing that stands out.
Yeah, I'm seeing a ton. I mentioned the two from LSU and Vandy. I think this is just kind of a challenge for these schools, and it's going to be more so because quite literally every kid in high school wants to come play in the SEC at this point. Obviously, I think Ethan Holiday is a huge exception because he's going to Oklahoma State as of right now. But if Holiday goes first overall, then he won't be going to Oklahoma State. So it's interesting to see. I think it's just, you know, these kids, the game's changing to where you have so much talent coming out of high school, and there's kids who pitch, play catcher, play on the base, play short, and play in the outfield. They do it all because what they're being taught is, look, these MLB scouts, they'll throw you anywhere if they want to. And that's just the way it rolls. And I just named a few that are big headliners in LSU and Vandy's classes, and it's guys who are getting looked at with first round value in the draft. So it's a challenge for those schools to kind of retain them and bring them back in. But it's also good to see that these kids are getting the kind of love they deserve, because if you could play in the SEC, I mean, you could play at the professional level, and that's just what we're seeing.
Graham, parting thoughts, anything to add that we didn't cover today?
I mean, not really. I'm you know, just talking about all this baseball. I'm just ready for baseball season to get here. Is it too early to say that as we record this in early August?
As a Braves fan, I'm just ready to get October and hope my team is there. But
right.
Boy, it's not going well lately for them.
Are they still keeping up with Philly, or is it just kind of what is it?
They're there, but there's no consistency.
That injury bug. It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah,
I mean, the Rays are fighting through it too with a gauntlet of an August schedule, hardest schedule remaining, and they sold. So we'll see how that's usually not a good mixture. But if there's any White Sox people watching, congrats on no longer losing.
Finally a win.
Yeah, finally. Congrats on those consecutive wins. No more reverse Moneyball. So that's something we love to see. So shout out to them. But yeah, I need SEC baseball like now, but we have to wait a good bit still, I think.
It's a hard thing to lose 21 games in a row in Major League Baseball. In any sport, but just think about that's a long month. Like you go a full month without winning a game. That is tough. Well, and they've got some like Garrett Crochet, Luis Robert. It's not like they don't have some guys that can play a little bit. But the White Sox are kind of becoming the butt of baseball jokes the last couple of years. Right. It's a pretty unhappy dugout if you're losing that many games in a row. Just not because they hate each other, but just because they can't do anything right, it seems. So yeah, it's brutal. But yeah, I mean, they have a ton of players, and I'm shocked they kept Crochet at the deadline, and even Robert got a ton of buzz at the deadline too. I mean, obviously Jimenez went to Baltimore and stuff like that. It's weird. It's weird. And hopefully no other team gets that same pain for a while. I wish that upon nobody. Yeah. Well, I'll give you my parting thought. I just sat and said, hey, going to be hard for the league to match last year's draft. Then I start thinking about 2023. You've already got Paul Skeens starting the All-Star game a year after pitching in the College World Series, not even. You've got Dylan Cruz will be in the bigs, I think, before long. You got Wyatt Langford. I mean, you know, that was an epic class too. And I feel like the SEC last year, you know, came out right there again. And I know about Ryan Prager, another one. We didn't really get into him because we talked about him just going through the draft. That's another guy that this time next year, you know, going to be a high pick if he could put together two successive healthy seasons. His damage, his leverage with coming back, or with coming back to A&M this year. But in any case, that'll be another one to watch. Just an endless list of names, endless list of stuff to talk about here. Even in the off season, we find ways to do it. We cover the SEC wall to wall in football, baseball, and basketball with equal passion, literally year-round. We've got a show every week in baseball, football, and basketball, and that's only a small sliver of our content. We're doing previews for football games coming up, for football seasons, anything and everything that's worth talking about for SEC football, we're talking about. We're doing it for basketball, too. We've literally got an audience that numbers in the millions every year on YouTube. So if you're interested in maybe reaching an SEC sports-loving audience, I think we're about as good a place to do it as you can find. Caroline.smith@southeastern14.com. Yes, we are now Southeastern 16. That email will get there, so send it to her with your inquiries and questions. We'll get back to you. Anyway, for Alfred Ezman and Graham Doty, I'm Chris Lee. We'll be back next week with another edition of SEC Baseball Weekly. We're going to start getting into a little bit of the offseason rules changes with scholarships and maybe bring a selected guest or two on to get into the weeds with that. Hope you'll be here for it. Thank you for watching. We are Southeastern 16, presented by Bet Online.